Hello, welcome everyone in another episode of Researcher Celebrity. Today we have Dr. Nimi Vashi with us. A brief of Dr. Nimi is she has done her BSc in microbiology from Sardar Patel University, Baroda, and then MSc in biochemistry from MS University, Baroda, followed which she went to pursue her PhD at ICGB New Delhi, and then she moved to United States for her postdoctoral research at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, New York. With this, we would like to welcome Dr. Nimi. Dr. Nimi, thank you very much for taking time out for this conversation.
It is a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so we start always our questions that how and when you decided that you want to be a researcher.
So I didn't want to be a researcher. I wanted to be a doctor, and I think that is something that a lot of people in like my age group or in India would resonate with because classically, I think also because my family was all doctors before me. So my grandfather was a doctor, fought also in the freedom struggle. Then my father was a doctor. My uncle is a doctor. So all the doctors. So I always heard about like clinical cases that they would have. They would often discuss, oh, this patient has this profile, and that was mostly the dinner table conversations. So I gravitated naturally towards medicine, like solving disease problems. But when medicine did not look like a reality post class 12, I really thought hard and discussed with my father of what I should do. And one of the things that came up is like usually people who like disease problems like microbiology. And so I decided to then do a bachelor's in microbiology. And I did it at Sardar Patel University, a small college called NV Patel College of Pure and Applied Sciences from Vidyanagar.
Mm-hmm.
And then to do my master's in biochemistry from MSc Baroda.
Nice. So when you were when you thought that, okay, you want to do a bachelor's and master's, were there any thought that you really wanted to do a PhD at that time?
Luckily, during my bachelor's degree, I met this amazing teacher. He is now Dr. Urvish Chaya. He was doing his PhD at the time and also teaching us. I was so fortunate to have him. So he was so meticulous about everything in research. He would always ask questions, ask us to ask questions that you should not just accept whatever I teach, although this is like a 50-year-old textbook printed thing. You should not just accept it. You should question everything we teach you. So that made me so interested in the classes that I was attending. So I decided to go deeper and deeper into the subjects. And I think that was my first sort of subconscious decision to go deeper and deeper into science and do whatever it takes and maybe even go and pursue advanced degree like a PhD.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So then when you wanted to do a deep-rooted research and now you might have decided that, okay, you want to do a PhD. Finally, before joining ICGB, what were the thoughts?
A lot of confusion, but also, so in India, I thought that I did not have a lot of choice. So I did my master's from MS University, Baroda, and the only thing that was either you go into the industry and start working straight out of after masters, and I didn't see a lot of career progression in that route. And so I thought, okay, I anyway like science, so I would pursue this deep degree and see what actually it is to do science. So in master's thesis dissertation, you get some flavor of like presenting, like doing the actual experiments, but the real deal when you get into PhD is very, very different. I am very fortunate that ICGB was the place where I did my PhD because it was a great environment. But I had no clue what I was getting into when I was doing in my master's. It was just this deep interest to do biology, and I was reading a lot of books. So one thing that MSU Baroda had amazing was this professor called Professor Shashikant Acharya. He had this library which had all the popular science books. So not textbooks, but also the popular science books. And the lectures, like the quality of teaching in MSU Baroda is excellent in the biochemistry department. So all of our teachers would just like grill us, but that was very, very useful. And they would give us questions like, okay, this is a case study. This is what the, because it was a biochemistry degree, it was about, oh, the patient's profile looks like this. What do you think is the disease problem over here and what kind of metabolic disorder it is? So you had to apply the theoretical knowledge to practical knowledge. But on the same time, we had this amazing library by this professor, Shashikant Acharya, and he had this a lot of like books. And one of them I read at the time was called Survival of the Sickest. It's about why diseases are selected for in evolution And everything in MSU Baroda was taught in the light of evolution, as Darwin said. So that got me interested in understanding host pathogen interactions. And I specifically chose ICGB and the lab I chose to study host pathogen interactions.
Okay. So then after joining, like the commitment was there, you finalized that, okay, you want to join ICGB for PhD. How was the ride?
Amazing. A lot of failures. I remember I had only one positive result for 3.5 years of my PhD, only one. And every hypothesis that I would propose would lead to a novel finding, but nothing would fall in line. So my results were not parallel and not stacked like the way you would want for a publication, right? So it wasn't nothing. There was nothing that was materializing into a lookable, like publishable story, and you need at least a publication or something positive to go into your thesis. So, but one thing I really liked at that time, and also was fortunate that ICGB had this rotation system, so you could actually go to labs, and I think that is extremely critical for institutions one chooses, because you need to have a feel of what your life as a PhD student is going to be for 5 years. And because every person works differently, it's all about the fit, right? Whether you fit with your mentors, whether there is a right kind of fit with the lab and the people who are existing in the lab, whether the environment is where you would nurture as a person, not just because PhD is 5 years, it's a long time. Mine took 6, so even longer. So yeah, so all of that, I got a very good glimpse of that in both the labs I rotated. Got a lot of freedom in Dr. Dheeraj Kumar's lab, so I thought he was the one I should do my PhD with. And he was like, yeah, failures are a part of science. Even in 4th year, you can get scooped. It's okay. The only thing is you should constantly keep thinking and keep learning. And he never discouraged any positive thought, any question, even questioning him on like, why do you think this? You could question him openly. And it is just so, I'm so fortunate to have him as an advisor.
Mm-hmm. So this is something which we always try to tell to our audience, that before joining a lab, you should be thorough about the mentor, the lab environment, because you are going to spend a lot of time there. There is, like, as Dr. Nimi also said, 5 or 6 years of your life, you are going every day somewhere. You need that environment where you feel that you belong and you are passionate to every day wake up with all the failure which has happened yesterday, with over months or years, depends how it goes. So you should be always like ready that okay, I will repeat the same thing today, probably with changes, because that's how you get your results. So you said one successful result in 3.5 years.
One brilliant successful result. We just didn't know why it looked like what it looked like. And then in the end, we ended up publishing a very original paper. It went to JBC. We showed for the first time that the Golgi apparatus was critical for phagocytosis. And that is one of the most original works of my life so far. I'm very proud of it. And that could not have happened if I was judged for all the failures. So what my mentor did differently was that he was like, okay, you have to keep the original questioning because you're a scientist. But at the same time, failures are not yours. They are dissociated from you. Your failures are, the science does not work the way you think it does, and living systems don't work the way you think it does. And when I train students now, I try to like tell them again and again that when your experiments do not work, it's not you. It is the living system does not work as we think it is. And we are just mere human beings. Life as a process of evolution has been going on for so many years. But unfortunately, what I see in labs is like a lot of pressure to publish. Often PIs do not give the time for students to think and come up with the best ideas. They don't even invest enough. My PI was totally invested in the lab. Like he was there to support us at any point, to correct our thesis, our papers, even late into the nights. He was equally involved and dedicated. And that's who you want. You want a team player, because at the end, you go as a master's student. You don't know anything when you enter your PhD, right? You don't know. You are just a student. From that, you are taking a 6-year-long journey to become a scientist in your own right. That's a lot of training, and the mentor has to be like completely involved in training you. Otherwise, maybe you will get a PhD, but what kind of a quality of a PhD would you be? So, yeah.
I think that was a great way to put it. And I remember in one of our researcher celebrity conversation, Mr. Vishal Jhelam, he mentioned that whenever it is about research and failures, he used to, have an argument with his advisor saying, question me, not my experiments.
Yeah.
He was like, you can question me, but not my experiment, because as you mentioned, the biological systems don't go the way you think. Your hypothesis sometimes just go opposite. And it is also like the best part of research. What I enjoy is like, there is nothing called negative result. It is something which is just not suiting your hypothesis, but this is the results. Depends how you want to take a story out of that. So with that, were there any, like there was a fear when you were doing PhD and you thought that, okay, things are not working well, I should quit, I should do something else? Were there any instances like that?
Yes, yes. I wouldn't say that I'm a saint. I haven't evolved to that even now. But yes, when you have failures constantly, one after the other, you think about like, am I doing the right thing? Am I actually, even if nobody tells you that, you start questioning yourself. Am I the right person to do the PhD, to do a PhD, right? Do I have it in me to do science? Yeah, these questions would often crop up, and I luckily had very good friends during my PhD, like the fellow PhD students in your cohort. And that is so important, to have these deep friendships with people who are suffering the same thing. Because when you're doing a PhD, nobody's going to understand. Your family is not going to understand. Your siblings, no matter how much they love you, they're not going to understand. Nobody's going to understand what you're going through. Only people, your friends from the past will not understand. Only the people who are doing the PhD with you or a few years ahead of you will understand that. So, I mean, we had like a lot of tea time discussions, dinner time discussions. We all lived in the same hostel in India. So a lot of discussion with even batches before me, like people who are going through that, and their journeys have been hard too. So you keep talking to people, and then like, again, my advisor had this open door policy. You didn't have to like take appointments or anything. You could knock on the door and talk. So that actually kept the confidence alive that yes, I would be able to do it. Just be patient. And I think learning to cultivate patience is such an integral part of PhD, because I think I was like, I have developed 10x more patience than I had as a master's student because of my PhD. But and yeah, my family sees that now, that, oh my God, you were not this person before. But yes, it changes. It's not just you're doing biology, it changes you as a person, right? And you cultivate that patience slowly, but it does not come naturally to you. You cry every day. But then the whole thing is, when there is an experiment to set up, there's an experiment to set up. When there are things to read and change, there are things to read and change. So you cry, then you read, then you, after 2 days, you do the experiment again. And that has been my strategy with always, like with everything. Even now when I see failures, or when the papers get rejected and all of that always happens, right? It's not like you submit the paper and it always gets accepted. So yeah, cry for 1 day, 2 day, then come back to life saying that, okay, I have to read more, I have to do more. That has been my strategy, and I think it works.
Nice. I think here I remember Dr. Robert McKee's one of the very important quotes about research. He said, do research, feed your talent. Research not only wins the war on cliche, it's the key to victory over fear and its cousin called depression. And I was like, there is nothing can do better justice than this, because nowadays, when after 3 years or 4 years, what we have seen is like people are dropping out. PhD students just give up after spending so much time into that. There is nothing wrong in even quitting, because sometimes you feel that this is not good for you, or this is not the best suited for you, and it is okay. But what we lose sometimes are the best researchers who have brilliant brains, because they cannot cope up with depression, or sometimes the environment is so toxic. And this is what brings us every single time back to this question, that the lab environment, as Dr. Nimi said, the friends, those discussions over tea sometimes are way more productive than discussions with your PI. And that is true. Correct me if I am wrong in that sense.
I actually was fortunate to have both. It's usually I feel that people either have excellent lab mates or they have excellent PI. I had brilliant lab mates and a very brilliant professor. Okay. So that actually helped a lot of that actually helped. So we had the 6 p.m. whiteboard discussions, which is when our PI would leave. And then we would start brainstorming, not just about our projects, but about everything on earth. So that would like open your minds to so many possibilities, and that would expand you to talk to each other just randomly. Like, why does this biological process happens? And if somebody is working on, say, oxidative stress, then what are the oxidative stress? Like, what does it look like in bacteria? How did it evolve? We will go into these deep discussion sessions. And I think that kept the joy to do science and like alive. And you don't find that very often, unfortunately, even in like the biggest centers in the world. But I think you have to cultivate that. So now if I look back and if I have to give an advice to somebody, it's like, look for your tribe. Find people who would want to do that with you, do that and nerd out with you over and over again. And I still do that. Like now, although I am in industry and it's very, very different, but I always look for people around me who are equally enthusiastic about science. They would want to really discuss something deeply. And that's the joy of doing science, because we might not be very positive about our results on a day-to-day, but it is science why we started it in the first place. And when you talk about science, you want to do more science. So you will come back to science again. And the one thing that you said is like about the toxicity in academia and people leaving. Unfortunately, I have seen those cases around me, and like of people very close to me. And it's very disappointing when you see people who are as good a scientist as you, even better sometimes, leave just because they did not have a supportive environment. And therefore, I really feel that it's such a matter of luck. But now I will also say that, therefore, like putting your best foot forward in like choosing your PI, maybe like doing some background research on them, understanding, like doing, especially choosing centers where there are rotations, definitely, because that gives you a first-hand experience of what my 5 years are going to look like. But doing a lot of background research on them, and even if they are new PIs, like I always join new PI labs because that's where I work best. So like asking their colleagues on how was it to work with them. And I remember this one time, I didn't do it consciously, but between the two labs that I had to choose for my PhD, both of them were excellent. So I could just not make a choice. Like both of them were excellent, brilliant PIs. How do you choose one working on similar things? And I ended up collaborating with both of them and publishing a paper. That was my first paper. But it was so hard. And then one of my PI's ex-colleagues, who was still like finishing her PhD, who was junior to them, they said that, working with this person was one of the best experiences of my life. He's one of the best scientists I've worked with. And I was like, okay, this is going to be my PI now. Yeah.
So this feedback from the lab members is also important, I believe.
Interactions with lab members are very important, because your PI, even if they are very, very involved, you might get an hour a day at maximum, right? From them, you talk, you discuss your projects, you discuss your experiments, and it's still like very formal. With your lab members, you are living your life with them. Actually, you're sharing your life for 5 years with them. They become your family, because again, who is going to understand your pain and your problems? So that is the microcosm that understands that. And coming from a small town, I think the initial lab members in my lab, they got me adjusted to Delhi life, which was very, very different. Then they got me adjusted to science, the techniques in the lab, because the culture is what the generation before you sets, right? So they set the culture that, okay, we work like this. This is our way to do science. This is how we do experiments. You cannot, simple things like this is how we culture cells. You don't let them overgrow. You culture them routinely. You are very careful about them. So all of this is so ingrained in my DNA even now, that if somebody mishandles cell line, I'll be like, no. That is because they taught me that, right? So it is so much. And I think it falls upon the PI too to maintain that kind of unity in the lab, that people help each other out instead of competing each other, because that also leads to toxicity in a lot of labs. And therefore, work where you can work, and that you only know by going there. So unfortunately.
So this was like all the fair side of, student and supervisor and the lab and as a whole environment. I'm sure that you might have seen the conflict with the supervisors and how that toxicity starts to come. And nowadays, when people start talking about this, and this is something which is coming up, if you have seen anything like that, what are your suggestions to our fellow researchers?
So although my PhD was very better than I expected it to be, my postdoc was not as amazing. So about handling conflict, I would say that really understand the person. Understand person understand their motivation, because at the end of the day, we are all human beings.
Yeah.
So it is very important to also see that whether you are a good personality fit with your PI. And it's not necessary that that would always be so. So if you are a person who likes to keep a conversation open in the spirit of science, you want a very fair and open discussion, and they are not open to taking any kind of feedback, then that's not a place for you. In PhD, it's harder to leave labs because once you join, it's like a 5-year commitment. So after 1 year, you are like, okay, I have some data. I might as well like drag along and publish this. But rather than leaving it at year 4, I think you should constantly like check with yourself every 3 months. Is this a place where I'm happy and I can do the best of my science? Because here you are here to do science. You're not here to like just get a degree. You're here to develop as a scientist. So is this the best place for me to do science, the kind of science that I want to do? Is this place really helping me grow in any way? Is this place contributing to where I want to be in the next few years? If not, then maybe you are better off somewhere else. And I know PhDs are in a much tighter spot, and therefore please do rotations. But if you are a postdoc and you have a chance to leave, I think run far and run fast. If you don't feel that you're the right fit, leave as quickly as possible. Don't like keep on sitting there giving second chances. I have made those mistakes, so I don't recommend other people to do that. Please don't repeat what I did. Just change things and then actively change it, and change it as immediately as possible.
Sweet. And to all the audience here, what we always try to give and provide here at this platform at Researcher Celebrity is that, as Dr. Nimi said, it is the thing where it is the stage where you have to make your own choices. As a PhD student, you have different choices to make, but when you're a postdoc, you have more freedom. And I think passion of science is what brings us as researchers. Money, at least in most of the middle income countries, or even in developed countries, if you are in academia, cannot be your driving force. The only driving force which can keep you going is your passion. How passionate you are, how more this deep love you have for your science. And as Dr. Nimi said, there is so much of science in this world, but there is one interesting topic which you want to study, which you want to do your research on, and don't never compensate on that with anything, because that's what you have got all the training for, and that is something which you can do the best. Dr. Nimi, coming back to the conversation, you have tasted academia and now you are leading industry in there. How different do you see the research at both places?
Very different. Also, I would say that I started looking at startups very early on. And I think we should perhaps touch on this a little bit, because we're talking about what careers are also possible after PhD. So academia is definitely one thing. But DBT India and BIRAC started this beautiful thing called as Association for Biotech-Led Enterprises, ABLE. So ABLE hosted a year-long competition. And every year one competition, which was called BEST, ABLE BEST, which was about biotech entrepreneurship startup teams. I remember the full forms. So in the first year of my PhD, luckily I had like very good colleagues, as I told you about. One of them, Dr. Amit Tripathi, he brought the 5 of us together, who were the hostel T group, who were always nerd out on science, that let's participate in this. And I was like, okay, this is entrepreneurship. What would it be like? And like, no, we just have to like put our brains together and see if we can apply what we are doing in the lab every day to a problem that we can practically solve. And so that was my foray into entrepreneurship. And that competition we had Professor Shailendra Vyakranam. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He was one of my first mentors. He was from Cambridge University, the Cambridge Business School. And he got me super interested by making entrepreneurship in biotech so accessible. He made it so easy to understand that you felt like, yeah, this is perhaps something because in the end, why do you do science? For 2 things. 1, to discover how life works. And 2, the end, to help patients. And because I come from a very clinician family background, my long-term dream was Alexander Fleming could, when he discovered penicillin, so many lives were saved in the world wars, right? And if not for that, so many people would have died just by mere bacterial infections. So how could you translate science to actually develop therapies? So we did that, and that got me interested in entrepreneurship, and I kept it alive during my PhD by reading more, etc., participating in some competitions. We won the able third place in able, but that was enough to like keep you interested. And then when I got to do my postdoc, I sort of kept it alive on the side, and that's how I ended up in this position. Now coming back to your question of like how different it is very different. In industry, you mostly, the way biotech companies run these days, at least in the United States or even in Europe, most of the companies are platform companies, meaning there is a technology which lies at the base of everything they want to do. And now you have to develop a scientific strategy on how can you develop drugs or maybe diagnostics around this. And so you work, so you can't change that. So you are confined. That is your confinement, right? That is where your universe is limited. But you are unlimited in the number of things you can do with that technology. Yeah. So, and if you started early stage startups, you actually get to, like I am, get to build a pipeline of products that you would now develop using that technology that would actually go into the clinic and one day go into patients. And yeah, that is an immense joy. And I think a great way that the entire training of mine has fallen into place to really in the end develop something that actually goes into patients.
Nice. So with all this enthusiasm to be an entrepreneur, what are your future goals?
I want to start a company of my own very soon, I hope.
Okay, good luck with that. And now going back to the guidance which people can get benefited from you. So at the end of, like, we are all now we are walking towards the end of the conversation. What you suggest for the now, because you are leading a team at Therapeutics, your suggestions for a student who's thinking to pursue a PhD and a person who's looking for the postdoc?
Okay. So I have a lot of like things that I will share based on my experiences. Please take this as n equal to 1, as I would as I would recommend, and also watch a lot of the other talks that everybody has given advice on. Maybe it resonates more with you because in the end it depends on what your goals are. So one thing for somebody to pursue a PhD, it depends a lot on where you are. Often, like when you are in India, you don't have a lot of option of growth with just a master's degree, so you end up doing a PhD. But I would say the most important thing to do a PhD is to have a passion for science. Like you cannot do it without that. And you will not go far without that. It will just become another thing that maybe you'll even have a degree. It's not like there are a lot of people who are awarded PhDs, but you will even have a degree. But in the end, what do you want to do with that? What do you want to do with your life? And remember that you're going to invest some of the most active years of your life. The best of your 20s, you're going to invest in doing a PhD. So you should calculate it as, okay, I invest this time of my life. What do I want to get out of it? First of all, is science really the one thing I want to do? As long as the answer is a very clear yes on this, you should go for it. If not, you should think why, what are the other interests I have? And then you should very meticulously decide that, okay, if there are other interests I have, does doing a PhD aid into that? Because there are a lot of alternate careers which are possible, like policy. You can also serve as like a grants officer. A lot of them are opening up in India too. Do I want to become an entrepreneur? Do I want to launch products that help people? If those are your goals, then start also thinking about, is PhD the best way to do it? Like what would you miss out on if you don't have a PhD? The other metric I want people to judge themselves by is how complete is your scientific training? Meaning by the end of your master's degree, do you feel you can, by reading literature, point out what is missing in that literature? Can you come up with an original project? Can you then devise experiments on your own without anyone's help to actually like build a project out on what experiments you will do and how you will scientifically build that project? If that is true, then you don't need a PhD. But if that is not true, then you need a rigorous scientific training to be able to do all of these things. Because once you finish your PhD, you will either work in industry or you will have a career of your own in entrepreneurship, or you will even serve as a grants officer, policy, anything. You will need to read and understand scientific data in depth. And that requires a rigorous scientific training in the background. Otherwise, you won't be good at your job, and that's not what you want to do. So that is my, apart from all the advice on how to choose good labs who will enable you to reach there, these are a few things you should think very deeply about before you want to do a PhD. And I completely understand that in certain countries, there are no prospects and so you end up doing, but please be very mindful, even during those 5 years, of what other skill sets you can develop if being a PI is not your end goal. And watch out for those things. Like, look at people who have been accomplished in those professions, reach out to them. Nobody says no. And if they do, maybe they are busy, maybe reach out to them again, ask them what helped in their careers. And if that is a career you want, start working early on it. You can do that during your PhD. And by the end, you are ready. One, you have a degree. And then two, you also know where you're going. You are not clueless at the end of your PhD, and postdoc doesn't become your only option, default option, as we call it. So yeah, that is about the PhD. Second thing you asked me about the postdoc. So yes, for postdoc, if you have decided, and I was also undecided, to be very honest, I was very academically minded at the end of my PhD. At the end of my PhD, I thought I wanted to be a PI because I really loved the journey of discovering something novel, publishing it, really fighting to publish it, because for my peer review was hard. So I really liked all of that, and I like solving scientific problems. So I thought, okay, yes, we should give academia a shot, a very fair shot. And but my father had cancer at the time, so I decided to like switch fields, do cancer immunology, and came to Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. And I always was very clear that I wanted to become a PI in the United States at one of the leading centers where I would have all the budgets and everything to run a very effective cutting edge lab. So I wanted to do the most cutting edge research. Now, when I started doing that, I realized what my competition was like, how prepared they were, and what their portfolio looked like. And my research was not as original in my postdoc to lead me to that path. So I started thinking again, like in a year's time, checking with myself, okay, my other interest had always been entrepreneurship. So how do I explore that in where I am? So I started volunteering for my postdoc association. I started going to talks because in the United States, you have many other more career options. You have like medical science liaison, you have venture capital, you have private equity, you have consulting. And all of these careers are something I had never heard of when I was in India. It was all very new to me. So I started attending sessions, making friends with people who are leading those consulting clubs, etc., seeing where my interest lies, attending all of these sessions because they were being happening in my institution and then in and around New York City. So really understanding what you want to do long term and keep checking with yourself every 3 months is very, very important. To apply for postdocs, apply to the labs you want to, like, do a very deep digging on your PI. If they offer you a chance to visit, if you are international, if they offer you a chance to visit and come see the lab, give a talk in person, take that. I made the mistake of not taking that because when you see the lab operate in function, there are some things you realize which you wouldn't see on a Zoom screen or, in our days it was Skype. So you wouldn't see that and know what exactly the lab is like, how exactly the PI talks to the other lab members. All of that is seen only when you are giving a talk in person to different people. And if they are very new labs, then please check with their colleagues what they were as colleagues. So if they were not good colleagues, they probably would not invest themselves in teaching you or mentoring you. And then the last thing, if you really want to be a PI and an academic, is like go for labs where the mentor is known to support you through the process. So there are different kind of grant structures in United States. Most of the times the PIs are very supportive in really hand-holding you to making sure that you check each tick mark on that list, which is a very rigorous list and it's very competitive, that you check all that tick mark from day one. Though you don't know it, they would know it. So they are like, so for a king, you need a kingmaker. For a PI, you need a PI maker. So just like that, you have to choose a PI who is extremely supportive and invested in you, and you like to work with them. So if that does not happen, then your chances, like you will lose out in the competition because it is extremely competitive. There are only 7% PI recruitment, so be very careful. And if you don't like a lab in postdoc exchange, it's not the end of the world.
Mm-hmm. I think what all our viewers can understand from this is like doing SWOT analysis of yours. And now, as Dr. Nimi said, you have to do the SWOT analysis for the PI also if you're considering them. And then For SWOT, everything comes for the PI, that the lab, the funding, because sometimes funding can be an issue also. Doesn't matter wherever you go. So all this needs to be done before joining or before committing to someone, because then neither you are wasting your time or their time. Okay, that is one thing which you should be prepared for every stage, even before joining a PhD lab or postdoc lab or whatever your aims are. Always keep them at the priority. Try to be faithful to yourself. That is the least anyone can do, because the rest everything goes on, whatever the way you want to live it. So here, Dr. Nimi, I want to ask you that, do you believe that the researchers are actually real celebrities? Because you have done academia, now you are doing industry.
Researchers, I mean, you mean PIs in academia are real?
Just any researcher, be it a master student or PhD student.
In my eyes, yes.
Yes, absolutely. So
researchers are better than any Bollywood celebrity, Hollywood celebrity, like anybody. Researchers should be the poster people of everything you see around you. If the world was the way we thought it would be, but it would be, because you saw that science took us out of the pandemic, nothing else.
Absolutely.
So yes, no government, like government's policy, all of this falls secondary. It is the scientific research. It is the vaccines that took us out of the pandemic. So researchers are the real celebrity, no kidding.
So this is just to give a little sentence about Empowering Science Foundation. The idea of Empowering Science Foundation came during the pandemic, when me and my friend thought that, okay, we can do something like that. And Researcher Celebrities was post-pandemic, that when we thought, okay, who actually saved this entire world? Nobody thought, at least I was not able to think, that the world can stand still, like nothing moving. You are like captivated in your own house. You are not supposed to go out. So we came up with this idea of celebrating research. That's the reason why we named it as Researcher Celebrity, that we celebrate every single researcher.
That's amazing. And I think that we need more and more of this, because unless scientists are brought to the forefront and they are talked about again and again, it does not make a child pursue science. So I would just like talk about one thing that I experienced at a conference last year. So how the world has changed pre and post pandemic. So pre-pandemic, every child wanted to be an astronaut. Mm-hmm. And an astronaut came and spoke at one of the synthetic biology conferences here, that if I were a child now and I had to choose one thing, I would choose to be a synthetic biologist. I would not choose to be an astronaut. And that is so big, because all of us as kids, the first thing we were like, okay, we also want to land on the moon. That dreams are changing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think with this, we would like to say thanks to Dr. Nimi, and we'll take the leverage for our audience that if you have questions, because you have heard Dr. Nimi explaining her experience, and you can take some lessons out just by listening. But if you need further guidance, Dr. Nimi is available. You can just Google LinkedIn. She's all there. And the way she has given this as detailed as possible, either it is for PhD or it is for postdoc lab, you can contact directly to Dr. Nimi. If you want Empowering Science Foundation to help you to connect with our more researcher celebrities, feel free to write it to us. Because what we want is, if you really want to travel somewhere and you are just not sure about the path, contact us. We'll try to make that happen. Thank you, Dr. Nimi, for sharing the fantastic journey, and good luck for that. Probably next time when we'll have you as a researcher celebrity again, you'll be an entrepreneur and a successful one.
Oh, that is the best wish I could ever ask for. And I also wanted to say thank you. This is an amazing initiative that you are conducting, and I will hope that it reaches every person in every smallest corner in the world as you envision it to. And you really create the celebrity status for researchers. That is what all of us want. And I wish you all the best in this amazing initiative that you've started.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nimi. And for all the audience, stay tuned. We'll be back in another episode of Researcher Celebrities. Till then, enjoy the research. Thank you, Dr. Nimi.
Thank you.